McLarens are notorious for two things, their depreciation and their reliability. Today we'll talk about the first topic, the values. Yes, it's true. After the introduction of, for example, the 570S and the 720S, values decreased. But that's perhaps an understatement. They tanked. So much even that other YouTube channels devoted a video to it. However, we also know that used car prices have been soaring since the pandemic. I, for example, frequently cover the 911 market on the channel, and over there prices increased somewhere between 20 and 50%, depending on the model you look at. But what happened in the McLaren market? Did McLarens go against the trend and continue to depreciate? Or did they remain flat or perhaps even increase? And if so, did they just follow the market trend or did they outperform the market? Some models looked quite undervalued after they took that large value hit. In this video we'll figure out if McLarens are still haunted by a high depreciation rate. But before we do that, we will first have a look at today's market so we know what's what. Over here we have the US McLaren market of May. Not all models are included, but most are covered. We have the 12C, the 570S, the 650S, the 720S, the 600LT, the 675LT, the 765LT and the GT. Now in total there are 504 cars for sale, and this means that the McLaren market is quite small. So your choices are relatively limited if you're looking for a McLaren. Now price-wise we can see that especially the 765LT sticks out. Prices start at $600,000, but fully spec'd MSO Spiders are way more expensive. Now because the 765LT is more expensive, it skews the graph a bit. So let's remove it and have a look at the other models. We can see now beautifully that the McLaren market can be roughly divided in three price areas. At the bottom we have the 12Cs, and they are hereby the entry point to the market. Prices vary between $100,000 and $150,000, and this makes it a really attractive proposition when you consider the car's hardware. That is, if you manage to get a good example. I think we are all familiar with the horror stories about these cars. Now the second price area is the one between $150,000 and roughly $250,000. Over here we can find at the bottom part the 650S and the 570S, and at the upper part the newer 570Ss and the GTs. And this price overlap of course brings interesting dilemmas. Do you go for a slightly older, higher mileage 650S or a newer 570S? What would you pick? If we move on and have a look at the third price area, we find the much praised 675LT, the 720S and the 600LT. Prices for the 675LT vary a lot, and this is to a large extent driven by the mileage. High mileage cars go for $250,000, whereas low mileage cars, and especially the ones with the roof air intake, can go up to $400,000. And prices hereby cover the complete 720S price range and encapsulate the 600LT prices. Again, there's enough choice if your budget stretches this far. And with that, it's time to have a look at the price development over time and get a little bit closer to answering the video's question. Did McLaren values rise after the pandemic and followed the market, or is the depreciation on these cars so high that they are underperforming? Now unfortunately I don't have data for all of the McLaren models. We will therefore focus on the value development for the 12C, 570S, 650S, 720S and 675LT. Let's have a look. Over here we have the value development over time, and you can see that there is some variation. Prices for most models increased with exception of the 720S. And that's interesting to say the least. However, before we'll cover that model, we will have a look at the cheaper ones. Looking at the 12C, we can see that prices increased by 21.6% between April 2020 and May 2022. And that's not a bad result for a car that has a poor reliability reputation. Maybe they were even undervalued in April 2020. You could pick one up for roughly $85,000, and for that money you are getting a hell of a car. Now however you need to bring at least $125,000 for a car with the same mileage. Moreover, the prime example 12Cs are starting to get extremely rare. There are only a handful of cars for sale with less than 10,000 miles. In line with this, I think that we can see a sentiment shift in the 12C market. More and more content is appearing in which the 12C is tipped as a car that might go up in value, or at least as a car that has bottomed out. Now if we move on and look at the 650S market, we can see that prices increased even more. They went up with 21.7%. And again, this is not a bad result. The price increase is, by the way, just as the one in the 12C market statistically confirmed. And this means that it's unlikely to be the result of chance. Most of this increase is, by the way, taken between May 2020 and June 2021. Values increased by 18.3% versus 2.9% between June 21 and now. and this is in line with the rest of the market. If we move on then to the 675 LT, we can see that prices increased by 15.7% between July of last year and now, and also this is a strong result. It's less than what we can see in the other markets, but the time period is of course a lot smaller. If you would have looked at the price trend over the same period, I wouldn't be surprised to see an increase that is much larger than in the other segments. After all, the 675 LT is truly something special and a car that stands out from the rest. Moreover, they are even priced above the 720S right now, so that tells me how much the market values this car. Now if we look then at the 720S, we can see that this one really sticks out. Prices decreased. What the hell is going on over here? I haven't seen such a downward sloping trend for a very long time. But don't worry 720S owners, not all cars came down in price. It's a very specific group. Let me show you what I mean, but we need to switch graphs to see those details. Over here we have the model year to price relationship for the 720S. In blue we have the market of May 2020 and in orange the one of today. And you can see that it are mainly the 2020 and 2019 cars that came down in price. So what does this mean exactly? Well, back in 2020, the cars from model year 2020 and to some extent also the ones from 2019 were new cars. And what we can see here is that these new cars did not escape the famous McLaren depreciation. New 2020 cars came down by 10% during the last 2 years. And this is of course way less than the rate that we saw before the pandemic. So in that sense it is a good result. Yet it shows that even when the market soared, new 720Ss depreciated. However, prices for used 720Ss increased. We can see that 2018 cars went up by 17.6%. So this means that the used cars that actually already suffered from this large depreciation hit increased in value while the new cars depreciated, but did so less than before the used car prices soared. And this is beautifully illustrated by the price development per model year. Over here we have the price development for each model year, and this reveals that 2020 cars, so the ones that 2 years ago mainly consisted out of new cars, came down in value, while the used cars, so the ones from 2018 and 2019, went up in value. Now interestingly, this pattern what we can see here also applies to the 570S market, but to a lesser extent. After all, the 570S is now out of production. So what does all of this mean? Well, quite simply that we need to filter out the new cars in order to get a good picture about the price development in the used market. And that's what I did in the following graph. If we look now at the price trends for the 570S and the 720S, we can see that 570S prices increased by 16.6% and 720S prices by 24%. So this means that the price increase for the 720S is the largest one in this graph. This in turn might also signal that the initial depreciation rate was too high on those cars. In May 2020 you could pick up one for $220,000. Now however you need to bring at least $280,000 for a car with an equivalent mileage. Naturally, the price increase is mainly driven by the coupes, as these are a bit older. Now interestingly, we can see that the price surge in the McLaren 720S market mainly results from a big increase after the first part of the pandemic. Values quickly stabilized after that, and this might be driven by a supply increase and a change in the median model year. Let's have a look at the market characteristics. Over here we have the development of the supply, the median mileage and the median model year. And here we can see that the median model year increased by 2 years, hereby exaggerating the price increase. Since then it came down, and this means that the point-to-point comparison in the graph is valid, but that we need to be a little bit careful with interpreting the points in between. If we look then to the graph on the left, so the one for the supply, we can see that supply levels for used 720Ss increased a lot. In May 21 there were only 90 cars for sale versus 179 now. So the absolute increase is clearly the largest in the 720S market. In the 570S and 650S market, levels are similar to 2 years ago, while 12C levels are lower. So we know now how the values changed over time, but we of course need to put them in a context to give a value judgment. After all, a 20% increase can be considered low if the competition went up with 30%. But before we have a look at all of that, if you enjoyed this video, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you. But now then, let's do some comparisons. And to avoid a big clutter in the graph, I divided the comparisons in 3 parts. The first one will cover the top end of the market, so the 720S and 675 LT. And for a comparison, I chose the 488. We already saw that used 720Ss increased by 24% and the 675 LT by 15.7%, but the latter increase of course happened in a much shorter time period. Now when we look at the 488, we can see that we don't have the exact same data points, but they are close enough to get a rough idea. Prices in that market increased by 22.3%. So based on this, the McLaren market performed quite well. After all, when it comes to values, mid-engine Ferraris are quite a decent benchmark. And with that, let's move on to the second group, the 650S and the 570S. As you can see, I picked the 991.2 GT3 and the R8 V10 base model to compare the price trends to. And I mainly picked these because the price trends are so similar. As we saw before, the 570S went up by 16.6% and the 650S by 21.7%. When we look at their German counterparts, we can see that the R8 increased by 13.2% and the GT3 by 24.5%. And this reveals that the increases in the McLaren market are quite good. After all, GT3s are famous for having strong residuals and for increasing a lot during the pandemic. We already discussed this in my previous GT3 market update, and you can click over here if you want to check out that video. And with that, it's time to have a look at the last comparison. Over here we have the price trend for the 12C and the first generation Audi R8 V10, and this includes the base and the plus model, but only the automatics. We can see that the 12C went up by 21.6%, and this is slightly less than the 24.3% in the R8 market. But as you can see, there's not much in it, so again, quite a good result for McLaren. And that seems to be a theme in these comparisons. In all three of them, McLarens didn't underperform. In some cases they even outperformed. And with that, it's almost time to wrap up this video. But before we do that, I still have some questions to answer. In my previous video, I asked you what you would like to know about McLaren values. So let's address them quickly, but I will only cover the ones which I don't think are not yet answered in this video. Luxy Lando asked what model offers the best value, will hold its value the best, and which one would I pick with an unlimited budget and which one would I pick with a budget. Now I think that McLarens in general offer quite good value for money when you consider the price point and the performance you are getting for that price. All models offer more performance and are cheaper than their respective counterparts. Yet, with all of them you need to think about the reliability and the optional warranty. Having said that, I think that the 675 LT is offering great value for money, especially compared to the Pista and the Specialis. Now with respect to the future value development, I think that the older McLarens are quite a safe bet. And when it comes to the cars that I would pick, I would probably go for a 675 LT when I would have an unlimited budget. But this is purely based on the reviews that I read. Next question. Fish C asked where the 720S and 765 LT are heading. For the 765 LT I don't have any data, but for the 720S I expect a flat development in the near-term future or a minor price decrease. The price trend for the used ones already started to flatten and supply is way up, and this development is also in line with the rest of the car market. Now finally, Who's Got My Name asked how the values compare to the 911 GTS market. Let's have a look. Over here we have in green the price trend for the 991 GTS and in red the one for the 992 GTS. But you can see that I only have one data point for them. Now looking at the 991, values went up by 21%, and this is roughly in line with the McLarens. And with that, it's time to wrap up and conclude. McLarens have been ridiculed for their high depreciation rate, but how did they fare in a booming used car market? We compared the values of the 12C, 570S, 650S, 720S and 675 LT to some other cars and saw that the price increase in the McLaren markets are on par with those in other markets. So the McLaren market followed the market trend. However, we saw that this doesn't apply to all McLarens. New McLarens still depreciated. We saw this in the 720S market and to a lesser extent in the 570S market. Yes, the value loss is less severe than before the pandemic, but it is one of the few cars that depreciated during the last years. So from all of this we can conclude that new McLarens are still very susceptible to depreciation. However, once they took this big hit, they seem to follow the market trend. And with that we arrived at the end of this video. Now if you enjoy this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, but would have liked to see the analysis for a different car, let me know the name of the car for which you would like to see an analysis by commenting it down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I will make a video about it. While you're at it, don't forget to subscribe and to click on the notification bell so you get notified when your requested analysis goes live. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.